Next Curve.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Next Curve's rethink, a podcast where we break down the latest tech and industry events and happenings in the world of semiconductors and Karl Freund's favorite topic of all time, AI. And, we distill this stuff into the insights that matter on this Silicon Futures program, which we do in collaboration with Cambrian Research as well as Tirias Research. And of course, everyone knows Tirias Research was founded and is led by the fantabulous, incredulous, I'm probably using that term really improperly, but
you're just running out of words.
Really yeah, exactly. Anything with incred, it just seems to fit you, Jim. Jim McGregor of Tirias.
Clan McGregor. Yes.
Clan McGregor of Tirias Research. Gentlemen, welcome. It feels like an eternity. Hope you're well. But before we get started, hey, look, we're going to be talking about Silicon Futures in this episode, talking about the headlines for the month of June, right? Are we in June already?
No, we're in July, so you need to get on track.
I know, yeah, but we're going to talk about the headlines from June. But before we get
June
started,
37th, June 36th today, right?
Oh, geez. I got to get this episode out quick. But before we get started, please remember to like, share, react, and comment on the episode. Also, subscribe here on YouTube and on Buzzsprout. Listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. Opinions and statement by my wonderful guests are their own and don't reflect mine or those of Next Curve when we're doing this for informational purposes only, to provide an open forum for discussion and debate on all things semiconductor and AI. And with that, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff: COMPUTEX, Nebius, what is it? Qualcomm Investor Day. The list goes on and on and on. There's so many things that happened in June. It was probably like my busiest month of the year, which typically June is pretty mellow, but this year it's absolutely insane. Crazy. So let's start off with COMPUTEX. Jim, you were like the only guy there.
I know.
I was there in spirit.
No, it was interesting. We've seen COMPUTEX is mostly a PC show, but it's kind of morphed over the years to focus on, more of the compute infrastructure and everything else. I wouldn't say there are a lot of major announcements necessarily there, because we have a lot of companies have their own events now, either earlier in the year or coming up, like AMD's coming up later in July. So they're kind of saving some of their stuff. But really, the one that stole the show was really from NVIDIA. NVIDIA coming out and talking about, getting into the PC segment with their solution. That was pretty much, I think everyone was talking about that. Both
RTX Spark, right?
It's the RTX Spark, which is the same silicon as the DGX Spark. It's still using the GB10 processor, but now with Microsoft support, they're going to be able to put in small form factor PCs and into mobile PCs. It's going to be interesting, and obviously that's along with the Apple MacBook Neo and all that stuff, all these small form factor PCs, and I think these AI mobile PCs are really kind of driving interest in the market, and that was really driving a lot of the interest at COMPUTEX. In fact, I would say that one of the interesting things that I'm seeing is the small form factor either workstation or PC. I think it really becomes not just that preferred kind of productivity tool, especially for developers, but I think it eventually becomes that in-home AI appliance.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see how that comes about. There was also gaming there. Obviously, it's always a big gaming show. The biggest news there, obviously, was from kind of the Intel camp, with their Wildcat Lake solutions for actually, was it Wildcat? No, it's not the Wildcat Lake. That was for the thin and light PC and the Dell XPS 13. But no, now they have their solution, and I'm trying to remember what the acronym is now, the nomenclature. but now they have their solution for the handheld games. So One Player X, Asus, and MSI all introduced handheld gaming modules or handheld gaming consoles with the Intel solution. Acer upgraded theirs with the AMD solution. So a lot of interest in handheld gaming, although I'm still not understanding why, because I don't see anybody use those outside of the home or office. But interest there. And, other stuff, we didn't see as much around the data center, but still a lot of interest in workstations, especially for AI developers.
Well, that was the thing last year, right? You and I were talking about how the workstation is going to be sort of this beachhead for enterprise AI. And then now we're seeing this evolution of this whole AI PC talk track that hit like a patch of molasses over the last couple of years, but seems to be finding some, it's being rejuvenated in a way with a lot of what, let's be frank, what Apple has done with the Mac Mini, especially with the advent of open Claude. So this whole agentic movement really taking off on top of, ironically, Apple, which was supposed to be behind on AI. All of a sudden, everyone, these things are sold out, right? But one of the things I thought was really interesting with RTX is that, that whole chip architecture is really mirroring what Apple has done, right? And what Apple and Qualcomm has done. And so it's, with the unified memory, you have also the what do you call it? Integration of two die in a similar fashion as a Fusion Ultra. And so, you know what? It's going to be interesting to see how NVIDIA competes against Apple. I think Apple has a lot of game in this segment, right? This emerging segment. And I think it's been highly underappreciated. And if Apple has game, that I think Qualcomm is either a close second or peer, especially for the PC segment. So, the thing about NVIDIA, though, is that they're just that 5,000-pound gorilla. And we'll see whether or not they can make AI PC happen in the way that everyone was expecting 2 years ago.
Well, and that's what's interesting is Apple has kind of gone down the stack to being in more cost-effective PCs, more mainstream PCs in the $599, $699 price range. While most of the PC industry keeps going up, even with the ARM-based solutions. Qualcomm did introduce the Snapdragon C, which is going to supposedly go into that price range. But Intel introduced their Wildcat Lake that's going to that price range. But for the vast majority of it, especially when at COMPUTEX, vast majority of all the PC stuff was still aiming at that $2,000 PC.
Yeah. Karl,
I think it'd be interesting. Yeah, I think many of us thought that the whole NVIDIA platform, the DGX Spark, would take off if Microsoft added their support. Well, now they've got it. So now they've got an operating system. They got a full stack. Got all the software NVIDIA's ever written and sold. All available on a relatively affordable, still a little bit expensive, but relatively affordable.
Depends on how much memory you put on it.
That is absolutely the case. It's absolutely the case. So it'll be very interesting to see what kind of demand they realize. If there is such a thing as an AI PC market, then NVIDIA should lead it. But we're not sure there is such a market, so we'll find out.
And you have to remember that if you're putting 128 or 256 gigs, like what they, recommend for like the DGX Spark, if you're putting that much memory in something, you're pricing at the price of a small car. You're talking $4,000 or $5,000 or more, especially with memory limitations today. You're not talking at a $2,000.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
What year are you in? Like 1980? That's like Hyundai Excel.
I can't, my car, no.
Okay. But I'm just saying
definitely
it's
not
not
Charles.
cheap. And matter of fact, that was one of the
There you
key
go.
questions I think everyone asked, was concerned about with the announcement was, we're not going to see these things until the latter half of the year. And is NVIDIA, and now NVIDIA is the top of this food chain right now. Can NVIDIA get enough memory? And, you know, what are these things going to be priced at when they come out? Because, you know, I don't know too many people that are willing to pay $5,000 for a PC, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, tell that to people at Apple. And speaking of Apple, WWDC, any thoughts there?
You know, that was interesting. I first off, they were focused obviously on AI and having an AI solution, and it's basically the foundation of that is going to be Google Gemini. Now, what I liked the fact, what I really liked about it is the fact that, you know, it works across all the Apple applications. Now, when you pick up Gemini on your Android phone today, it doesn't work across all, even the Google applications. It doesn't work across them. It's a pain in the ass to get to work across that. So so that's it. Now, I assume Apple's going to have the same challenges with third-party apps, you know, not to work. So I think that's good in making it actually a true Apple experience.
Yeah.
Now, my only concern, and maybe this is just a short-term strategy, and I'm thinking it probably is, that I don't think baking it or you know, really basing it just on Google Gemini is the best solution. I think in the long term, you want to have all these different solutions maybe as possible baselines, whether it's Claude or Perplexity or Gemini or ChatGPT, because let's face it, we're seeing so much innovation in those different models. It's changing rapidly. And what, you know, if Gemini may be a good solution today, but it may not be the best solution tomorrow. So we'll have to wait and see how that morphs. And quite honestly, Apple, you know, knowing Apple, they may have their own solution within 2 or 3 years that kind of eliminates using anybody else's AI. So it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves.
I agree with you. I think the unspoken hero here probably is not Apple, it's Google. Google has now extended their reach all the way down to all the Apple family devices, all the way to beyond their own data centers, beyond their own cloud. They're selling TPUs in large volumes to a select number, at least initially, a select number of hyperscalers to really take on NVIDIA in a very big way. I think
even having their own custom NPU that you can use as IP. Yes.
Yeah, I really think in 5 years we'll look back at this moment in time as a turning point for Google, becoming a real leader in AI.
Yeah, my take is this. First off, I don't think Apple is going to come up with their own foundation model. They're going to probably continue to execute on a similar strategy globally, because one of the things that's happening is this whole sovereign movement. And so by region, you're seeing a lot of regulations, especially around AI, that are creating these chasms, right, for especially U.S. AI companies. And so let's take one of the largest markets for AI in the world, which is China. Google is not going to be in China. And Apple knows that they cannot bring anything Gemini based into the Chinese market. And so and it might not be just China in the future. You're going to probably see Europe also become, and they already are, becoming a sovereign market. They're starting to wall themselves off and create barriers for U.S. AI companies. And so I think they have look, I think the folks at Apple are not stupid people. They're very, very smart. They know where to invest, and they're looking at what it takes to diffuse AI in a safe, private way across their portfolio of devices and services in a way that is going to be global. But part of that is transversing all this fragmentation that's happening right now because of these sovereign movements. So we'll see what happens. I'm actually not that bullish for Google because of that. I think they're going to be less and less a global company, and there's going to be more regulations that are going to start to infringe upon their market share and mind share. And I think Apple knows that. So, but we'll see how it goes. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I sat in a couple of developer sessions, and there was one on MLX, which is a software extension that they have in their AI stack that allows for you to create like clusters of Macs for distributed inference and training, right? And this is over a Thunderbolt 5. Really, really interesting stuff, but it takes like this whole idea of putting a model and running a model locally on a cluster, a small cluster of these tiny little Mac Minis to the next level, right? I thought that was a really huge announcement, and yeah, we'll see how things go. But I mean, I think the competitive landscape around this sort of outside of the AI super data center landscape is getting really, really interesting. Really interesting, you know. So, but let's talk about neoclouds really quickly. I was at the whole Nebius thingy. I know, Karl, you've been following neoclouds for quite some time, and what's happening with them, especially as it relates to their, AI infrastructure investments. But Nebius had their first Inflection analyst and media event, and so, and any reflections from that event? I don't know if
reflections or inflections. Are we talking?
Inflections.
No, just kidding.
Well, yeah.
Well,
Inflections.
My colleague Kevin Hine was there, and he was really amazed, and I think that some of the neoclouds, especially like CoreWeave and Nebius, are kind of getting a bad rap because now they've got a lot of capacity, and a lot of that capacity is being chewed up by the hyperscalers. So they're looking at it like it's just an extension of the hyperscalers. But as Nebius really pointed out at Inflection, they have an entire software stack to help companies, really implement AI solutions. So they're more than just a GPU as a service provider, more than just a hardware solution. They've got the software stack and the engineering resources to help companies actually use those resources and become an AI company. Yeah. So, I mean, that was kind of, at least for us, was probably the biggest takeaway from Inflection.
Okay. Karl, any thoughts on what's happening with all these guys?
Not really. I think that what we're seeing is NVIDIA is helping neocloud companies because they don't develop their own competitive hardware chips.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So at the end of the day, NVIDIA would much rather sell to Nebius and to somebody who's developing a competitive chip to push them out of their infrastructure, push NVIDIA out of their infrastructure. So I think it's a smart move on both the hyperscalers, the neocloud providers, and NVIDIA to try to wall it off. Say, no, if you want to come to me, it's going to be NVIDIA.
Well, last month you pointed out, and we talked about how NVIDIA broke out the reporting for data center, right? Yep. And then the neoclouds, I mean, they stuck on one side along with enterprise, and then there's a hyperscaler bucket. And I think you're right that it's definitely a captive market largely for NVIDIA. One of the things that I got out of being at Inflection is that the neoclouds are, I mean, they're not quite there yet in terms of having their next layer, quote unquote, platformish kind of services. They're trying to get there, right? I think one of the things that the neocloud players, the pure play neocloud players are finding themselves in is a situation where they need to evolve beyond GPU as a service, right? The infrastructure as a service game. Now, whether or not, I mean, because there is this talk track that the hyperscalers or the cloud service providers who have their own neocloud, stuff are at a disadvantage. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Maybe they're not under as much pressure to take their RPO and deploy infrastructure as quickly as possible to tap in, convert that into revenue. But they have the enterprise relationships, right? And I think that's the one thing that the neoclouds lack. And so I'm looking forward to figuring out, to seeing how these guys figure out how to actually create enterprise markets for themselves. It's easy to say, hey, we have AI stuff and we have a stack, but I mean, everyone has an AI factory stack. You know what I'm saying? Everybody. And so how do you differentiate? That's the big question mark.
Well, and to your point, as they expand out beyond just GPU as a service, and Karl's right, pretty much they are all an NVIDIA house from the GPU perspective, but from the CPU perspective, they're actually an AMD house. So, how can they leverage that and use that, the power of the AMD processors as well as the rest of their ecosystem to actually offer additional services beyond just those traditional AI or GPU as a service offerings?
Yeah, and I think the hope is that agentic creates a new inflection point for them.
I think it's not just in agentic, because I know that they've talked also about other things such as being kind of being the backbone for physical AI and robotics and stuff like that. So I think I do give them credit. They are looking well beyond just where they are today and where things are today, but where do they need to be to meet those market inflection points going forward? Hence the inflection.
Yeah,
I'm hearing a lot of inflections around here. Maybe
yes, we are.
It's going to be
inflection spelled with a Q is actually a quantum computer company just down the road here.
That's true.
Other county.
Okay. Yeah, I want to make a really quick comment here about, I was at Cisco Live. That was the first event that I was at. And from a silicon perspective, there was this emphasis on Silicon One. To be honest, I didn't know too much about Silicon One until last year when I hung out with Martin Lund for the first time. And he kept saying, our stuff is programmable. Our chips are programmable. I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that? And so, what he's really talking about is it's called P4 programmability. It's like this layer that sits on top of, how do you? It's hard to describe. Anyways, the long and the short of it is, I think there's like a value proposition, especially for hyperscalers who are starting to really push the envelope of networking, right? Especially for their inference and their agentic infrastructure. And so, one of the things where Cisco is finding a home for their networking technologies is with the hyperscalers, right? They're trying to branch out into more diverse and diversify their range in terms of the customer segments that they hit, but they have a pretty nice home in hyperscaler. And I think going forward, and something to watch, right, is that Silicon One and programmable network, what they call network processing units, may have a compelling value proposition, especially for hyperscalers. And, we're starting to hear more about like kernel optimization and network optimization. There's all these optimizations that need to happen, and to have that flexibility with the programmability, I think it could be a key differentiator, and something that I think maybe the industry will start to look at a little bit more, especially as you see these large scale bespoke requirements start to come down the pike. So that was one of the interesting things that came out. And the other thing that I noticed, and is something that we've probably observed over the past 3 years, but this requirement to just get stuff out and generating tokens as quickly as possible from procurement, the moment that something is procured to the time that it's received, getting that thing deployed. I don't know. What do you guys think about that trend? I think we're seeing that with Dell, HP, all these guys having some similar talk track, but any inflections on that?
Well, I think you're on a key point there, is that the flexibility that they're trying to build in with their networking is critical because the networking requirements are going to vary not only by the type of workload you're running, but even the size of workload. So even if you're just running AI workloads in your data center, that size is going to depend on how many GPUs are you trying to network together? How many do you need to be able to run one or millions of models simultaneously, especially if you're doing agentic AI and you're running them, in parallel or in series. And Cisco is, making sure that those programmable solutions work with optical networking and even co-packaged optics to make sure that, that they're going to have that flexibility even as networks increase in terms of performance and efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, something to keep an eye out on, because these large scale infrastructure, inference AI systems are just starting to trend. I think, especially the agentic stuff.
Well, and you point to two key things. One, the hyperscalers definitely are taking any hardware that they can possibly get their hands on right now because the demand is insatiable. But also, hyperscalers are unique in the fact that they want to have different types of hardware. Because let's face it, no two workloads are going to run the same on each piece of hardware. So some hardware is going to run some workloads better than other hardware. So they're trying to make sure that they have kind of that diversified solution depending on what the customer needs. That does hurt them in certain ways. We've seen this over the past year where people really wanted NVIDIA GPUs and some of the hyperscalers just didn't have enough of them. So they're going to partner with like the neoclouds. But, in the end, they have to think about all their customers, and it's a much more diverse set than just AI workloads.
Yeah, that's a great point. Hey, what about all this drama around closed models? You had Anthropic, Mythos, and Fable. They became available, and then they got banned. I don't know. It seems like every day the situation changes, but this is something that was a thing in June, right, in the world of AI. And so, any inflections on that?
You had to get that in.
Totally using that term wrong, but
Totally wrong.
Yeah. Any reflective inflections?
I would kind of shift the conversation in that vein towards OpenAI.
Okay.
We've seen OpenAI's virtual stock price. They don't have a stock price, but we've seen their stock, in their company and brand diminish somewhat this year, as Claude continues to gain traction and a lot of revenue, and open source models continue to provide really good value to companies who want to take something and build a specific bespoke solution for their company. I kind of wonder if OpenAI, I know they're talking about maybe they're not going to do an IPO this year.
Which is
I think that their best days may be behind them. I think they missed an opportunity to get out with an IPO in a timely fashion while they were king of the hill. And I'm not sure they're going to stay king of the hill. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're not. We're already seeing things like Gemini, back to Google, outperforming OpenAI. We're seeing Claude take off like crazy. And we're seeing open solutions like NVIDIA Nemo being applied for specific solutions like BioNemo. And I'm not sure where OpenAI goes now. Now they're going to do their own chip, right? So they can lower their costs. Maybe that's window dressing for an IPO. I don't know.
Yeah. To your point, though, I think that, we're going to see a lot more of that as AI matures. I think we're going to see certain companies excel in certain areas. Certain models, certain companies, period. They're going to have expertise in certain areas, and it's not just saying, well, one's enterprise, one's consumer. It's really going to be, okay, one's really good for, materials research. One's really good for scientific modeling. One's really good for this. And we're going to continue to see that, I think, as things evolve. One, because they have to get more efficient because they're getting so large in a lot of cases. But two, just because of the extra expertise. You've got different experts working on different problems. And, even a lot of the open source or models that we have out there today are leveraging some of the open source stuff from NVIDIA. They probably have one of the biggest, they're probably one of the biggest sources of open source solutions today.
Yeah.
Who would have thought we would have said that 10 years ago? But they are. So it's going to be interesting. I think we keep saying this time and time again that we're in the early days of AI, but we're going to keep having these DeepSeek, revolutionary moments every 6 months or every year. And it's going to keep changing the dynamics of the market for at least the next 5 years, if not 10. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
I think you're right. And I think the next big bombshell is not a language model. That training things on language models has gotten us very, very far. It's done really well. But there's a lot of content out there that we're not training on, things like video, which reflect the real world around us. And you add the physics to that, which is not part of training models today. If you start talking about real world trained models, that could do to the entire LLM market today, kind of what DeepSeek did by kicking it in the shin with a more cost-effective solution.
Yeah, I think just as long as they're not training on Marvel movies, then you're okay. Otherwise, the physics are going to be totally
would be really weird.
Yeah. So, and then Star Wars, right? Because there is no sound in space.
Boom.
Yeah. Well, what is really interesting for me this year is how no one talks about AGI and ASI anymore. In fact, I think there's no appetite for it. Which is probably one of the reasons why Renee and team should probably change the name of their CPU. But anyway, the thing is, I'm coining this term where I think that's starting to get traction. It's called the reverse Ricky Bobby. If you're first, you're going to be last. And so, I think everyone's learning from the mistakes of the priors. And I think it's going to get really ugly. This is the future that we imagine for AI based on a singular narrative. We get married too much to it and don't look at what's happening on the in adjacencies. You're going to be in big trouble because you're not going to see really what's happening. And your mention of the Chinese models, they're not trivial. And right now, I'm not a big fan of the AI Foundation labs, running to Washington and whining. I call that whining. They really need to compete and figure out how do they restructure their cost structures for whatever AI economy they are imagining, so that it can be competitive. Because the DeepSeek moment was a bigger thing than any of these guys were portraying at the time. And what we do see is this serial whining, and I'm not a big fan of that. It's like, hey guys, get your game on. If you don't have your game on, you will be last. It doesn't matter that you were first. And to whine all day long.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, we're seeing a lot of innovation, especially on the hardware side. I think that's going to change that. Within memory compute, like with the Grok solutions, or even with the HPC high bandwidth compute solutions that are going to be offered on the new Qualcomm C1000 processors and their AI 250 accelerators. We're seeing a lot of innovation that's really, I think, that's going to change a lot of those cost or those TCO dynamics, just being able to run and operate these data centers, for different types of workloads, especially inference processing.
Well, let's jump to Investor Day really quick. Qualcomm had their Investor Day, right? I mean, you're speaking of like novel architectures and stuff. They introduced what is that? HPC, high bandwidth compute.
High bandwidth compute.
I still don't really get it.
I'll give you the 30-second primer. It's basically HBM, or it's LPDDR memory stacked on top of a base die, a custom base die. Basically, it's a full XPU. So think of very similar to what they're trying to do with HBM4E, where it's going to have a customizable die underneath DRAM stacks. This is going to be LPDDR, so kind of the mobile memory on a full XPU die. And then they're going to be able to take this HPC and pair it with both, their C1000 processors, which will be coming out in the 2028 timeframe,
Yeah.
and their AI 250 accelerators in that timeframe. So they are basically trying to, re-architect everything to make it, more towards that in-memory compute for very high performance inference processing.
I had a friendly discussion with my friends at Qualcomm about.
I think it was an argument.
It was an argument. They were so apologetic for not being late. They said, "We're not late. We're not late to this market at all." And I'm like, "Yes, you're very late. You've sat on the Cloud AI 100 now for 7 years, without doing anything with it, which I think was a big mistake." On the other hand, one could argue that they've learned a lot while being close to the market, not in the market, and they realized that it's really a memory problem. And so they came out with this, with HPC, which I think is just a brilliant move to lower the cost of high bandwidth computing and increase the capacity tremendously. The problem is they came out and said, "Well, we're not late, but here's our roadmap, and now we're going to be later."
And not just
too slowly.
And not just a memory problem, but also a networking problem. So they followed a very similar timeline or strategy that AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel have followed in terms of we need to go out and acquire networking resources. So they did that with AlphaWave. But to your point, AlphaWave is their primary, foundation into that market for the next, year and a half until they start coming out with these new products. That and their custom silicon solutions, which we don't really, they kind of gave some hints with some of the companies that were there. Obviously, there was Meta, there was AWS, there was Google, there was, Microsoft and Humane were all there. And we know Humane's already a customer. Now, we don't know who's going to be the custom silicon customer because they didn't officially announce that, even though they kind of teased that they would. But they're going to have that AlphaWave networking solution, which drastically changes their perspective on the data center market, because they're going from basically zero to, billions of dollars, $2 billion, by the end of 2027, I believe, and like 15 billion by the end of 2029. So significantly changes their perspective too. So to your point, I don't think that they took it as seriously as they should have. But I think that acquisition of AlphaWave and that acquisition of Modular, which they just announced, from a software perspective, making it easier to run software on their platform. I think that, those two things are...
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think if you're going to show up late, show up big. And that's what they did. They showed up with a roadmap that was jaw-dropping on what they're planning to do. So they've gone from not just late to the party, but not even in the party, to positioning themselves to become a major force in the industry. I was very impressed with their roadmap. I wish it wasn't taken so long to develop, but that's kind of the nature of silicon.
It's reverse Ricky Bobby.
I can't believe we're going back to Ricky Bobby again.
That movie is the Bible of tech. Come on.
Okay. What did you watch this weekend over the holiday weekend, Leonard?
F1. But I've been watching the British Grand Prix. But hey, look, the modular. You mentioned the modular acquisition. I thought that was really interesting. Heterogeneous kernel optimization. Everyone says software, but it's a much. My view is, or understanding, is a much lower level thing that we're talking about in the software stack. But this idea of optimization at the kernel level across heterogeneous IP, that's a big deal. I think that's something that NVIDIA doesn't have at the moment because their stack is so GPU centric. This could actually be a big deal for Qualcomm and a differentiator because, I think most folks don't understand that these guys already have an AI stack, and they've been doing this stuff especially from an inference perspective, for years, much longer than the PC, much longer than a data center for inference, right? Especially outside of the mega data centers. But the odd thing is a lot of the technologies, and we mentioned this before in previous episodes, mobile technology is actually making its way up, right? Jim, you mentioned they're using mobile memory for the HPC, right? LPDDR instead of HBM, and I think that's something to keep in mind. And so when I saw that, I went, wow, okay, the kernel level stuff is important. And it's cool to see that, Qualcomm tuned into that. But also, we can't forget that these guys are masters at networking technologies, right? For telco. And so when we start to look at these next gen optimizations of networking and technologies, Qualcomm's not a slouch here at all. Right.
Well, and let's face it, with data center workloads, we always get to a point where there's an abstraction layer. Whether it's a VPN or we're using containers, whatever, we get to an abstraction layer to where it's easier to run stuff across all platforms. Yeah. So we're not there with AI today, but modular is probably the closest company to creating that abstraction layer at this point in time. Yeah.
And so that's what I thought was really interesting about that announcement. It's not just a generic software play. Do you know what I'm saying? It's deeper. And it's closer to the hardware. Let
me ask you guys a question. Let me ask you guys a question about modular. Does it give Qualcomm more flexibility in the choice of the processor technology they choose to adopt?
I believe it does.
I think so.
Once again, and this is an interesting thing. Nobody talked about it. Obviously, there was a rumor about Tenstorrent, and obviously they already acquired. It starts with a V. They already acquired a RISC-V company late last year to focus on RISC-V. I would venture to say if we're going to see RISC-V solutions from Qualcomm, we're going to see them in the data center first, not in the handset or the PC, because I think that's going to have the biggest impact. So to Karl's point, I think that it does give them that easier transition to RISC-V.
You did that on purpose, right?
He did. He queued it up perfectly.
That was beautiful. See, we're synchronized. Not all the time, thank God.
I would agree with you, Jim. Let's not forget that the Nuvia was RISC-V based, right? It was not ARM based. It was RISC-V. No, I'm sorry. It was ARM based, but they had roadmaps potentially to switch them to RISC-V if the Qualcomm ARM litigation didn't turn out the way it did. They had that option to move. And so I think they know how to shift the business, but the business they want to shift is the data centers. It's not the handset. There's no win in it for them on the handset other than just lower royalty expenses.
And they did buy the Ventana microsystems. Ventana Microsystems. So that in itself was actually a huge acquisition. And to your point, I think that really changes the game.
Hey, I wanted to put this out there. One of the things that I'm noticing about their, Qualcomm's quote unquote Ricky Bobby, not first, but play here is they're kind of taking a dual two-prong approach here with entering the data center market. It's merchant and custom, right? Mm-hmm. And so that I think is really something to consider. I think that I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it's becoming a very crowded segment. I mean, you have
which one?
The custom silicon, and I see the interest in it and the need for it. Obviously, the hyperscalers are trying to optimize around specific workloads. I don't think that ever goes away, but Now you've got Broadcom, Marvell, MediaTek,
Meaning,
Qualcomm, a host of design houses, and Intel and AMD actually, although, we usually don't put them in that camp. I think that's becoming a very, very crowded segment. I think the interesting thing is what comes next. And I'm gonna pose this to you. So here's my tee up for Karl. The
Oh my God.
think about when we actually get to a point where AI can actually do full chip development. Then are you going to a company like one of these companies, or are you just going to a Synopsys or Cadence or Siemens to have them do you a custom chip?
I think the answer is yes. As you that AI, I think, is a potential risk to Broadcom and Marvell custom design. So if I can do the custom design using AI, instead of spending a lot of time and money getting Broadcom or Marvell to do my custom chip for me, that's going to be a better solution. I think we'll get there. I don't think it's tomorrow. I don't think it's maybe not even within 5 years. But if you have a long enough time horizon, I think the answer to your question is yes.
I agree.
Interesting. Yeah. Just as long as it doesn't turn out like vibe coding, then we're okay. No vibe coding.
Well, obviously, Qualcomm already has some customers for their custom silicon,
Right.
and they're working obviously with Microsoft for their C1000 emerging market silicon solution. So they have customers, and I think that's the key thing is they're increasing their projection for their 2029 revenue, non-handset revenue, from 22 million to 40 or 22 billion to 40 billion. That's a huge, huge increase. And it takes their TAM, especially with their continued growth in automotive, which they may be the largest within a year or two in terms of revenue. It takes their TAM into the trillions. So, I mean, this does definitely alter the dynamics of Qualcomm. And it's so rapid with data center that I don't think, I think it's all in at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think that their opportunities is their ability to diversify quickly, if and when
Right.
the market turns. If when we get to a point where a data center all of a sudden becomes a non-thing, they have the chassis, if you will, for to borrow from Nicole Duggal, who leads the the automotive and industrial IoT stuff. They have, I think they're better positioned for the AI diffusion motion that happens outside of these large scale data.
I agree. I think Christian has
I
done
don't think-
a magnificent job of opening the company up to lots of opportunity.
Yeah.
As he saw the end of the handset wave coming, he didn't want to be crushed by it.
I mean,
So
look at what they're
he's done a
doing with
remarkable job.
look at what they're doing at industrial IoT. It's a little bit weird because we're so used to platforms not working in IoT, and they're actually going deep and broad, and that's hard to do. And it looks like they're seeing some success. They're getting mind share, but obviously they're making some traction. And these platform plays are really friggin' tough, right? It's almost like it's almost like you don't do it because it's so hard.
It is tough.
Scale.
Most people don't realize when you're talking about industrial, just talking about like medical, that's like 1,000 different markets. It's from all the different scan modalities to all the wearable tech to all the, in-home, in hospital, all the different solutions. It is insane the number of markets you're actually targeting. It's not one, it's 1,000.
Thousands, exactly. And so, any other final points we want to make on a jam-packed June?
I definitely, and this was huge, Apple conceding that they had to increase prices because of memory. I mean, that
Right.
was
Yeah.
huge. That was a shock to the market because obviously they're one of they're one of the 800-pound gorillas that has access to capacity and to memory.
Yeah.
So to see them do such a drastic change in terms of pricing, and it was very drastic on their higher end systems.
30%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is huge. I mean, that's a signal. And obviously the big focus right now is on data center capacity, and that's where most of the memory is going. But everything else, and we saw this earlier in the year with at CES, or since CES, I should say, we've seen handset companies, pare down the number of SKUs they're going to offer,
Yeah.
and even delay when they're going to introduce it. Same thing with the PC segment, and I feel sorry for a lot of these embedded applications and startups, especially at CES. I'm like, these guys are not going to have any memory allocation.
Yeah.
It kind of it put an exclamation point on the situation, even though we've seen announcements over the past couple of weeks of a new mega development between SK Hynix and Samsung in South Korea. We've seen Micron's trying to expand both in New York, Japan, and Idaho. Even though we're seeing these announcements, memory's going to be continued constraint for a couple of years, and it's going to have a huge impact.
It'll be very, very, very interesting to see if the U.S. government allows Apple to acquire memory from a Chinese provider.
CMXT.
They have asked the U.S. for permission to buy from MXT. So we'll see where that lands, because
maybe
that could change. It won't change data center. It won't change data center at all. If anything, it'll free up capacity for the data center.
And all the IoT and embedded guys have already done that. They've already gone off and started qualifying the Chinese vendors and the tier 2 vendors from Taiwan and stuff. They've had to, just because they can't get capacity anymore.
These guys are going to get crushed, the smaller guys. And this harkens back to, the COVID. No, was it the COVID thing? No, it was before where they were stockpiling. What was that? Yeah, it was COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the IoT guys got creamed. Smaller guys got creamed. And this is, I think, one of the unintended consequences of just this, frenzy, the data center build out and infrastructure build out frenzy. It really puts a lot of pressure on the smaller guys. But then, we're also seeing some of the IoT-ish chip providers doing pretty well now, so anyway, really crazy month of June. I don't know. You guys have anything for July other than AMD?
AMD.
AMD, obviously the AMD Advancing AI event, and then shortly after that, we're going to have the Future of Memory and Storage conference coming up the beginning of August.
Yeah, you were there.
And then the middle of August, we have Hot Chips. So we have a number of events that I think are going to at least give us some very good detail on future hardware technologies.
I could do it with a boring month. I really can.
And there is no boring month anymore. Everyone's staking something out, so there's no boring month.
December was going to be boring, and NVIDIA acquired all the assets of Grok. So
well, that's my message to the AI and semiconductor data center semiconductor industry. Chill out, guys. Slow things down just a little bit. But anyways, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's great catching up. You know what? So
hey, we have to finish this with another Ricky Bobby quote since you started this. You can't have two number ones. That just makes 11.
And there you have it. Hey, everyone, make sure to reach out to Karl and find out about Cambrian AI Research if you don't already know about Karl and his wonderful research. You can contact Karl at www.cambrian-ai.com. He's also on Substack and Forbes. And also reach out to Jim McGregor and Tirias Research at www.tiriasresearch.com. And of course, please subscribe to our podcast, which will be featured on the Next Curve YouTube channel. Check out the audio version on Buzzsprout, or find us on your favorite podcast platform. Also, subscribe to the Next Curve research portal at www.next-curve.com for the tech and industry insights that matter. And we'll see you next month. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Have a great month. Hopefully boring.